For the second time this offseason, the Orioles have added a veteran right-hander on a one-year deal to the back end of their rotation. And this time, it's Mike Elias's old buddy Charlie Morton who is coming to Baltimore. We'll break down the move, tell you how he fits into the Orioles rotation, and why I think this maybe makes it even more likely the O's make a trade for the top of a rotation starter. That's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, January 3rd, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on this live Friday evening episode, of course, the Orioles had a Friday news dump for me, so we've got a signing to talk about. The Orioles have officially signed Charlie Morton, the 41-year-old veteran right-handed starter, to a one-year, $15 million deal to add to their starting rotation. I'll talk about who Morton is at this point as he goes into age 41, kind of what the stuff is now, what kind of pitcher he is at this point in his career. We'll talk about what would happen for this deal to go very right for the Orioles and also what could happen if this deal goes wrong. And then, of course, we'll talk about the fit on this Orioles team. Obviously, he becomes right now one of their top 5 starters, but I don't think this signing means the Orioles are done acquiring starting pitching this offseason. And I'll tell you why coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So thanks to everyone who is joining us live here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you are here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. This episode will be out on audio a little later on Friday evening, as well as luckily I was around to jump on here as the Orioles announced a signing on Friday. Again, Charlie Morton is headed to Baltimore on a one-year, $15 million deal. Thank you to everyone who's jumping in, who's in the chat as well. If you kind of have any questions about this deal when we get to the end of the show, might have some time to answer a few of those as well. So let's start with, okay, who is Charlie Morton and kind of what is he now at age 41? What does he still do well, and how could he end up being a good addition to this Orioles rotation? Well, as I mentioned, Charlie Morton is a 41-year-old right-handed pitcher. He has been in the big leagues for a very long time. He debuted with the Atlanta Braves all the way back in 2008. When Charlie Morton debuted, Jackson Holliday was 4 years old. Charlie Morton, I believe, faced Matt Holliday almost 40 times in the big leagues. That will be the discrepancy when those two, Jackson and Charlie, are teammates on this Orioles roster in 2025. But Morton debuted with the Braves. He got traded to the Pirates. He pitched in Pittsburgh for a while. He spent a shortened injury year in Philly. And basically from 2008, when he debuted at 24, to 2016, when he was 32, he was just like a solid MLB starter. He was never in anybody's rotation for a full year. He had really only had one full season. That was 2011 with Pittsburgh. Otherwise, he had been some struggles, some injury issues, never allowed him to pitch, 30 starts in a season. When he was on the mound, he was getting ground balls and he was getting some soft contact and generally was a solid starter, but was never rising to the level of an all-star, a big game, a top of the rotation type guy. But once he was released by the Phillies after an injury-riddled 2016 season, the Astros front office, which at the time included Mike Elias, Sig Mejdal, and others who are now in Baltimore, saw something in Charlie Morton as a cheap free agent that they could do to turn him into a really good starting pitcher. And so they went out and they got Morton on a pretty cheap 2-year, $14 million deal in free agency. And they brought him in and said, Charlie, we're kind of going to change everything you do. He was used to just pounding hitters with sinkers, looking for weak contact, looking for ground balls. And the Astros basically said, no. Like, we think you have better stuff. You can hunt strikeouts. And that is exactly the changes they made. They switched out his sinker for his four-seam fastball. They had him throw way more curveballs than he ever had in Pittsburgh and turned him into a strikeout pitcher. He went from a 17% K rate that final year in Pittsburgh to a 26% K rate that first year in Houston. It was a huge, huge jump for Charlie Morton. He was a big part of both the 2017 and 2018 Astros. He helped them win that 2017 World Series. Then he signed with Tampa for a couple of years and was really, really good in 2019 with the Rays. That is the best season of his career. Put up 6 WAR through 195 innings, had a 3 ERA. He was fantastic that year. Then he signed with Atlanta before 2021. And that is kind of the groove he's gotten into. He's pitched the last 4 years with the Atlanta Braves from 2021 through 2024. And in those seasons, while he hasn't been the dominant guy he was with Tampa and Houston when he kind of revitalized his career in the late 2010s, he has still been a valuable starting pitcher in those 4 years with the Braves as he got into his late 40s, or his late 30s, I should say, not his late 40s. He's not Jamie Moyer quite yet. But in those 4 years with Atlanta, he averaged 31 starts per year. You'll take that. He averaged about 172 innings per year. You'll take that. Posted a 3.87 ERA with a 27% strikeout rate, well above league average, and a 9% walk rate, right around league average, and a good 44% ground ball rate to go with it. He ended up being just, not your number one type guy. Now, he had a really great year that first year in Atlanta in 2021 with a 3.3 ERA and 186 innings. Since then, the last 3 years, age 38, 39, and 40, he's just been a solid innings-eating back of the rotation starter, and he's been very, very helpful to the Braves in those last 3 seasons. And of course, he did win that World Series with the Braves in 2021. And it's not just the Mike Elias, Sig Mejdal, Houston connection. It's also he worked with bullpen coach Drew French in Atlanta. French, of course, now the Orioles pitching coach, and he comes to Baltimore to reunite with him as well. But in terms of Morton now, if you're kind of looking at the stuff, it is still good stuff that he throws out there. What he did in 2024 was he made 30 starts for the Braves, stayed pretty healthy the entire year, threw 165 and a third innings and posted a 4.19 ERA with a 4.46 FIP last season. It was a 46% ground ball rate, his best since 2021, and he had a 24% strikeout rate to go along with a 9% walk rate in Atlanta last year. He was pretty much a league average pitcher who gave you 30 starts at the back end of their rotation at age 40. That, honestly, you can't ask for more than that from a 40-year-old pitcher, what he did last year. Now, when he did go to Atlanta, as we kind of shift to talking about his stuff a little bit, Atlanta did make one change. Now, Houston made the big changes, turned him into a four-seam curveball guy who could really, really hunt strikeouts, and he peaked above a 30% strikeout rate with Tampa in 2019. But Atlanta said, let's take it a step further. Your curveball is clearly your best pitch. It's been that way for a lot of Morton's career. They said, let's just have that be your number one offering. So when he got to Atlanta in 2021, for the first time in his career, his curveball was his most used pitch. He threw it 37% of the time that year. And then the next year it went to 38%, and then 43%, and then back to 42% usage on his curveball. But every year he threw less and less fastballs. And in 2024, he had the biggest discrepancy between his curveball at 42% usage and his four-seam fastball at 29% usage as his number one and number two picks. He was very curveball heavy in the approach this season. And it makes sense because that is Morton's best offering. And when he's getting outs, he is using the curveball. It was good this year. Opponents hit just 200 against that curveball. He had a 34% whiff rate against it, just a 309 slugging percentage. But if you go back to just 2023, when he was 39 years old, his curveball was one of the best pitches in all of Major League Baseball. He threw it 43% of the time. It had a 42% whiff rate. Opponents hit just 177 against that curveball in 2023. And according to StatCast, it had a plus 25 run value on that pitch. That was the best curveball, the best breaking ball in all of Major League Baseball that year, and the fifth best overall pitch in all of the majors in 2023 by StatCast run value. That is incredibly impressive for a 39-year-old to have a top 5 pitch and stay healthy and make 30 starts while he's throwing it. Other than that, I mean, he still throws pretty hard. If you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, I'm going to show a chart right here from StatCast and Baseball Savant. This is Charlie Morton's year-by-year four-seam fastball velocity. And while his fastball velo did go down a little bit in 2024, as you can see on this chart, he's maintained a fairly good velocity. I mean, he was averaging 94.1 miles per hour on that four-seamer last year. It was down from 94.9 in 2023, but basically 94 to 95 is where he's sat basically since 2019. Like throughout his late 30s into his 40s, he hasn't seen a huge drop-off in fastball velocity. Now, when guys get into their late 30s, you expect him to lose a mile per hour or so, and that's what's happened to Morton, but it's not like he's dropped to throwing 91 or 92. Like a 94 mile per hour fastball on average, and he can still tick it up to 95 or 96 when he needs to. That's going to play at any age, but it's pretty impressive when you can do that at age 40. And he's not the pitcher he was at one point in Houston when he was throwing 96. But as you can see, like early in his career with Pittsburgh, he was throwing 92, 93. Like he's throwing harder now than he was 10, 12 years ago. And it's impressive that he's been able to continue to hold on to that while staying healthy. Again, he has made 30 plus starts in each of the last 6 full seasons. The only one that's not in there is, of course, the shortened 2020 season. That was 2020. He only made 9 starts because it was a 60-game season. Other than that, every year since 2018, he's made at least 30 starts and stayed healthy. And 30 starts is kind of that benchmark. If you can make 30 starts, that means you pretty much stayed in your team's rotation the entire year. Like at worst, you had one short IL stint. Any more than that, and you're not going to hit that 30 start marker. That is really impressive for a guy throughout his late 30s to continue to throw hard, hunt strikeouts, have good stuff, and stay healthy. It can be tough to find combinations like that. In the last 4 years with Atlanta, I mentioned he's thrown a whole lot of innings in those past 4 years. He is 7th in innings pitched in Major League Baseball in the past 4 seasons. Corbin Burnes is 6th. Like he's basically thrown as many innings as Corbin Burnes. Now, Burnes has been better, obviously, on a per inning basis, and that's why he just got $210 million, and Charlie Morton got 15. But even if you look back further, I mentioned the last 6 full seasons, dating all the way back to 2018, 5th most starts in Major League Baseball since the start of the 2018 season. Only Aaron Nola, Jose Barrios, Patrick Corbin, and our old friend Kyle Gibson have made more starts since the beginning of 2018 than Charlie Morton. He has just stayed healthy and not had a major injury that entire time. And not many pitchers can say that. And that is what you're looking for when you make a signing like this for a 41-year-old for 1 year, $15 million. You're not looking for the old Charlie Morton upside that he had in Houston and Tampa when he was a top of the rotation guy and he was an all-star. You're looking for a guy who can eat innings and stay healthy and a veteran who can pitch at the back of your rotation. And that is what they get now. Like the FanGraphs Steamer projection for Morton in 2025, 28 starts, 154 innings, and a 4.13 ERA. It's not the sexiest line you're ever going to see, but that is good depth to have. And it's also nice to know that not only are you getting a veteran who is coming in and has been in the big leagues for 18 seasons and has thrown over 2,000 big league innings. If he stays healthy, he's going to hit 400 career MLB starts this year. But he also has a lot of postseason experience, 17 postseason starts, and he has a 3.60 ERA in the playoffs in 80 October innings. That is a nice thing to add to a team that, of course, has been swept out of the playoffs in back-to-back years and is trying to find a little more postseason success. So if you're looking at Charlie Morton as another back-end depth number 4 or 5 starter option, it's a good pickup for the Orioles. But that's not saying all is going to go well. There is certainly some risk involved when you bring in a 41-year-old starting pitcher. So coming up next, we'll talk about the things that have maybe been trending in the wrong direction for Charlie Morton and reasons why this deal could go poorly for the Orioles in 2025. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. You can bet on which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score. I will certainly be taking, even with the Ravens, I believe being the biggest favorites in franchise history. They're almost 20-point favorites against the Browns on Saturday to win the AFC North. I would still take the Ravens there. I think they might just bludgeon Cleveland and get themselves to a division crown. But it is thrilling when you make those picks at FanDuel. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we are back here on a live Friday evening episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Decided to jump on here because the Orioles have made a signing, bringing in the veteran right-hander Charlie Morton on a 1-year, $15 million deal to add to the back end of their rotation. Thank you to everyone who is joining in live here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you can. And for those of you listening after, if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it may be, that really, really helps out the show as well. We got a good conversation going on in the YouTube comment section right now. Keep that up. And again, if you have any questions further about the signing, may have time to get to it right at the end of the show. But just kind of ran through the scouting report on Charlie Morton at age 41 and talked about how it could work for him in Baltimore. Let's talk a little bit about how this maybe won't work out. And the first glaring thing is he is 41 years old. It is difficult. It has been done before, but it is difficult to be an effective major league starting pitcher at age 41. Now, that's not old as a human, but that is old as a professional athlete. And at some point, your body starts to break down and you just can't do what you did 5-10 years ago. Now, there are signs to say that Morton's not truly breaking down. As I mentioned, his velocities have stayed the same. He's pitched well into his late 30s. He's not a guy who's fallen off a cliff. And the numbers don't seem to suggest that. But I also don't know if there's as much upside as there was even 2 or 3 years ago for a guy like Charlie Morton. And his stuff did pretty much all play down in 2024. Now, it was a very small drop-off in fastball velocity, but in terms of overall stuff, he was not the same pitcher. His overall stuff plus went down from 106 to 95 from 2023 to 24, 95 much closer to like big league average for a major league starting pitcher. And his curveball, which as I mentioned has been his best pitch and has been a stuff plus monster pitch, was 139 in 2023. It dropped to 122 last year. So still a great curveball, but not the same shape, velocity, movement, all that good stuff that it had just a year ago. His swing and miss percentage dropped from 32% to 26% this year. Like, some of his stuff is certainly going down. If you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, kind of showing the Charlie Morton pitch mix right here, as you can see, like, it's still major league quality velocities. 4-seamer at 94, sinker at 93, curveball at 81, and then you can change up at 85, cutter at 88, 89. Like, it's a 5-pitch mix that Morton still goes out there with. It's going to be very heavy on the curveball and the 4-seamer, and then he'll throw in the changeup, sinker, and cutter when he needs to. You know, the cutter and sinker to get those ground balls. The rest of the pitches, he's looking for strikeouts. But at the end of the day, and now kind of switching over to showing from the sliders on Morton's Baseball Savant page, courtesy of Baseball Savant and StatCast, like, you can see he's good with ground ball rate. His curveball is still really, really good. You can see the breaking ball run value is still in the 83rd percentile. But other than that, if you're just looking at the other sliders and looking at the other stuff, you're seeing a lot of blue. Now, it's not dark blue. This is stuff that's, just below or right around league average in a lot of these categories. And again, for a 40-year-old pitcher, you'll take a guy that's league average and giving you 30 starts any day of the week, but it's not the sexiest, most exciting signing. And that's what a lot of that does show, is that some of those big numbers he had with Houston and Tampa and early on in Atlanta just are not there. Like, his 4-seam fastball, even though the velocity is still there, it's starting to lose some shape. Stuff plus on that pitch is down to 72. Had a 49% hard hit rate against his fastball. That's very high. Had a negative 11 run value at StatCast. That's not great for your number 2 most used pitch. His 23.8% strikeout rate last season was his lowest since 2015. Remember 2015, and that was his final year in Pittsburgh. That was before he went to Houston and made the stuff changes, the approach changes to basically change his entire repertoire as a pitcher. This is his lowest strikeout rate since he made those changes. So you can tell, like, the stuff is falling off a little bit. Now, he had a 9.3% walk rate this year. That was down almost 2% from 2023, which is good. He had a bad command year 2 years ago. He kind of fixed that last season. But 9.3% walk rate, while it's down from last year, it's still his second highest since 2016. It's still higher than we usually see. So lower Ks and higher walks, lower whiff rates than you usually see, lower velocities, that is all the signs of a pitcher who is in the declining phase. Now, it's all about how you choose to look at this signing. If you're just looking at the trends of his numbers and his stuff, you're saying, this is a pitcher on the back half, right? This is a pitcher who's not what he was a couple of years ago. You could call him on the decline. On the flip side, if you're looking at his numbers and comparing it to his age, it's like, damn, that is really, really good for a 40-year-old to be posting that amount of innings, that kind of production, that amount of health. That is really impressive for a 40-year-old. So it's really a glass half empty, glass half full situation. And I know there's always a lot of Orioles fans in the comments taking the glass half empty side of this, and that is your right to do so. But it's really about how you truly want to look at things. And again, like, is he declining? Yes. But as good as he was, he's declining incredibly slowly. That is the good part. A lot of guys, when they get into their late 30s or even mid 30s, they start to decline and then they fall off a cliff. You have these guys who have these peaks of success, and then as soon as they get older, they start to lose stuff. They start to lose some fastball velocity. They just drop off and they're no longer major leaguers. Charlie Morton has declined, but it's been an incredibly slow decline for Morton. Like, he had another great year in 2021 with Atlanta at age 37. And then it was just like, hey, an okay year in 22, a solid year in 23, an okay year in 24 when he's 40 years old. Like, usually once you're at 40, you're way out of baseball. And he still looks like a guy who, even if he continues this very, very slow decline, that is still going to give you the production of an effective number 4 or number 5 back of the rotation starting pitcher, even at age 41 in 2025. And that is what the Orioles are hoping for. Because again, he hasn't fallen off the cliff, and his trajectory makes it seem like he's not going to fall off a cliff. I mean, yeah, he's been talking about retirement for a couple of years now, but he continues to pitch well enough to continue to get contracts. And Morton talked to, I believe, The Athletic after his last season with the Braves. It didn't seem like the Braves wanted to bring him back. And he basically said, like, he wants to play one more year. This could be his final season. And he also said he wanted a spring training site that was close to his home in Bradenton, Florida. So while the Orioles location hurt them in the Corbin Burns sweepstakes, it seems like spring training being in Sarasota helped them in the Charlie Morton sweepstakes here. And he signs that 1-year deal. And again, he's 40 years old. This is what happens. The numbers start to go down a little bit. And if he does fall off a cliff, like, it's still possible that at 41, he's just hit his wall. He doesn't know it yet. And by June, we look up and we're like, he's toast. That's not ideal, but that is why I say, and many say, there is no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. Like, yeah, you can say, oh, it's $15 million. Well, A, it's not your money. And B, with David Rubenstein in charge, the Orioles have a whole lot of payroll room to work with. They can easily give out a 1-year, $15 million deal to a 41-year-old. And if it doesn't work and he has to get moved to the bullpen at some point, I think he can still be effective there. And if it really doesn't even work in the bullpen and he has to be moved somewhere else, he DFA'd, released, whatever it is, it's a 1-year deal. There's no long-term commitment. And that's what you want to do to a 40. You don't want to give a 41-year-old a multi-year deal. It's a contract that really can't hurt you. It can only be a net zero or help, to be honest. Like, if it's really hurting you, you watch him struggle for 2 months and you release him. Like, that would be unfortunate. And I don't think that's going to happen again. I don't see the drop off, the off a cliff coming for Charlie Morton. I think those steamer projections, as I mentioned, 28 starts, 4.13 ERA, that is really, really nice to have in Major League Baseball. I get that's not super, super sexy, but this year he had a 4.19 ERA. That was a 101 ERA minus. What that means is A 4.19 ERA was basically a league average ERA for a starter this season. So if he can post 4.13 like the projections have for him next year, and if you can get 154 innings of league average starting pitching, that is more valuable than you think because of just the amount of injuries and fluctuation in performance you see from starters. That is really helpful. And maybe the Orioles are going for some sort of Dodgers thing where they're just adding as many arms as they can to eat up those innings. And that is where we're going to finish the podcast coming up next. We talk about Morton, what can go well, what his scouting report is, what may not go so well. Now let's finish with, okay, Charlie Morton, how does he fit in with the Orioles? Talk about that to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Gametime. Now, I love going to events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories of the last year was attending so many Orioles games. I mean, the energy, the excitement, unforgettable. And it's not just Orioles games. I'm going to a couple Maryland basketball games coming up soon, went to a comedy show last week, and you need tickets for those things. And now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I was recently looking for tickets to those upcoming Maryland games, and with Gametime Picks, I found amazing deals and could even see the view from my seat before buying, and the app has all-in pricing that shows the cost up front, no surprise fees. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. So to finish things off, as the Orioles have signed Charlie Morton to a one-year, $15 million deal, let's talk about how he fits in Baltimore. Really, that is the big thing here, right? Like, how does he fit with the O's signing with this team? First and foremost, again, he's a veteran guy. You're looking to get 150, 160 innings out of him. He's going to throw a lot of curveballs and four-seamers. He's going to mix in the changeup, the sinker, and the cutter. He's going to hunt some strikeouts. He's going to get some ground balls. He's going to help you win some ball games. Now, the question is, in what spot will he do that? Well, right now, he's another addition to the back part of the rotation, kind of similar to the one-year, $13 million deal the Orioles gave out to Tomoyuki Sugano earlier this offseason, coming over from Japan to add to the end of the rotation as well. Now, they're in two different spots. Sugano's 35, Morton's 41. Sugano's coming off an MVP season in Japan. Morton's coming off a league average season with the Braves. But Morton's had 18 years in the big leagues with a lot of success. Sugano has never thrown a pitch in Major League Baseball. So they're coming from different sides of the equation, but I think they might end up as the number 4 and number 5 starters in this Orioles rotation. If the season started tomorrow and the O's had to send a rotation out there, and again, let me know in the comments if you disagree and you think you would order it differently or have different pitchers in there. But I think the starting rotation would be Zach Eflin as your number 1, Grayson Rodriguez as your number 2, and then I would accept any order of 3 through 5. I think it's Dean Kramer, Charlie Morton, and Tomoyuki Sugano are going to be 3 through 5. I'm fine with any order of those 3. I think the production, I think Dean Kramer will be the best out of the 3. So that's why I'd say Kramer 3, Morton 4, and Sugano 5. But if you want to mix those guys up in any way, if you really want to throw Cade Povich or Albert Suarez in there, I totally get that as well. But I think those are the best 5 starters. And with Morton, he again raises the floor on this team. He immediately becomes one of the 5 best starting pitchers on this roster, which means he fills in a rotation spot. He's able to give you innings, give you depth, a guy who's been there and done that. It makes the Orioles better. Now, does it make them incrementally better and not a lot better? Yes. And that is where I get the frustrations, where it's like all these moves this year that the Orioles have made this offseason, Gary Sanchez, Tyler O'Neill, Tomoyuki Sugano, and Charlie Morton, they have made the Orioles incrementally better. We haven't seen the big splash David Rubenstein move to make the Orioles a lot better. And I understand completely the frustration that comes with that. But with that 5 of the rotation, your rotation depth in this order then becomes Cade Povich, Albert Suarez, Trevor Rogers, Chase McDermott, and Brandon Young. And that gives you, I think, to feel good, you need to go into a season with 10 starting pitchers who you feel like could start a game for you that season. And adding Morton gives you a total of 10 guys with Brandon Young there at the end who could start a game for the Orioles this season. That just kind of makes you feel better going into the year. Now, if Morton can continue to do what he's done in Atlanta the last couple of years, he's a dependable number 4 or 5 starter. He's a veteran, he knows how to pitch. He helps the Orioles. What I do think this means for the O's moves the rest of the offseason, we are just about halfway through the offseason, right? We got 2.5 months before the season starts. I do think this means the Orioles really won't be signing another free agent starter. And I talked about it on yesterday's episode, how the O's have shown some interest in Jack Flaherty and Kyle Hart, a couple of free agent starters who are still out there. I think with bringing in Morton, again, it's just a short-term 1-year commitment. But I do feel like at this point, the Orioles are probably not going to bring in another free agent. And if they do, maybe it's someone else, another veteran, a Justin Verlander, a Max Scherzer, something like that on a 1-year deal to add to the depth on the back end. It still could happen. They still could be talking with Jack Flaherty and Kyle Hart and those guys. But I feel like this makes it less likely that the Orioles are going to sign another starter via free agency. And we kind of knew that was the case anyway, once Corbin Burns signed in Arizona, that the options left out there, maybe not even worth it across the board. And I talked about that specifically with the Jack Flaherty situation on yesterday's episode. So you can go back and check that one out. But here's where I think it gets interesting, because while I don't know if this means the Orioles are done free agents, well, I think it leans that way, I think this could actually help them when it comes to trading for a top of the rotation starting pitcher. Because again, if you're going to go get the top of the rotation starter in free agency, your 2 options left are A, Roki Sasaki. Doesn't seem like he's coming to Baltimore. And B, Jack Flaherty, depending on what you think of him. And as I stated yesterday on the show, I just feel like it's better for both sides, Flaherty and the Orioles, for him to just not come back to Baltimore and sign a nice deal for him somewhere else after a really, really good bounce back 2024 season with Tigers and the Dodgers. But what I do think is the Orioles are not done adding to this rotation. Even though they get Charlie Morton, they upgrade their number 5 spot, their rotation gets better, and you could go into the season with Eflin, Rodriguez, Kramer, Morton, and Sugano. You could do it. That is a rotation with the offense that the Orioles have, can win some games, and can get them to the postseason. However, I don't think they're done. I don't think this honestly has any effect on them trading for a starter. You could argue it makes it more likely, and here's why. Among some of the top starting pitchers that may be trade targets for the Orioles this offseason, especially with Jesus Luzardo in Miami off the board now, and Garrett Crochet in Chicago off the board. 2 guys who are on very much rebuilding teams and were already dealt this offseason. Luis Castillo, the Mariners, they're still trying to win baseball games. Pablo Lopez, the Twins, in theory, in that division, trying to win baseball games. Dylan Cease on the Padres, still trying to win baseball games. Framber Valdez of the Astros, still trying to win baseball games. Those 4 guys may be available in trade this offseason. And the reasons why is because each of those 4 teams are either A, trying to cut some payroll, move some payroll around and stay competitive, or B, are potentially trying to just get out from a player who's an expiring contract and they know they won't be re-signing, so they're trying to get something for them before they become a free agent after 2025. So those teams that are trying to win, if they're going to deal Luis Castillo, or maybe more likely, if the Twins are going to deal Pablo Lopez, if the Padres are going to deal Cease, if the Astros are going to deal Framber Valdez, they would probably want an arm in return, if not to fill in for that pitcher they trade in their rotation, at the very least give them another option for a younger, controllable starting pitcher to give up someone better who has a shorter time left on his contract. There is a good chance that the Orioles were to get, and maybe I won't put Luis Castillo in this conversation because the Mariners have some good starting pitching depth as well. So even if they traded Luis Castillo, it's not like a banking on it that they would ask for a major league ready starting pitcher in return. But I think in the Padres sense for Cease, in the Astros sense for Valdez, and in the Twins sense for Pablo Lopez, I think all 3 of those teams would be asking about a young major league ready starter in return that they could just plug in that open spot the trade creates in their rotation. So for the Orioles, you have this group of Cade Povich, Dean Kramer, Albert Suarez is not young, but he's got a lot of team control, and Chase McDermott, who you could be dangling all of those guys potentially in a trade. And while Chase McDermott would probably help the Orioles this year, I don't think he's a candidate to be in the opening day starting rotation. Povich, Kramer, and Suarez, even with the Morton signing, absolutely all have a chance of being in the opening day starting rotation for the Orioles. But they also are big candidates to potentially be dealt in this deal. So, for example, if the Padres say, we really need a young-ish starter to fill in Cease's rotation spot, because they don't have a lot of pitching depth right now, if we're going to trade Dylan Cease, and they say, we want Dean Kramer. Before the Morton signing, if you traded, let's say, Dean Kramer and a hitting prospect for Dylan Cease, if you made that deal, you would have Dylan Cease at the top of your rotation, with then Eflin, Rodriguez, Sugano, and then you'd still have Cade Povich / Albert Suarez as your number 5. Now that you have Charlie Morton, Morton can immediately better fill in for that production of Dean Kramer. I think he's much closer to the pitcher Kramer is than Suarez or Povich are at this point. I think Morton is an upgrade over Povich or Suarez, what you project to get from them in 2025. So now you have the ability and the depth to trade from one of those younger starters, because you legit have a veteran number 4 and 5 in Sugano and Morton now. So if you deal for Dylan Cease and you trade Dean Kramer, say he's your projected number 3 starter, you trade Dean Kramer, well, Dylan Cease just becomes your number 1, Eflin bumps to 2, Rodriguez bumps to 3, and you immediately have replaced your number 3. In the old scenario without Morton, you do that deal as well. The guys get bumped. You still have a question about number 5. You're like, is Cade Povich ready? Can Albert Suarez do this again? Instead, you have Morton, where you know exactly what you're going to get from him. And instead of Povich and Suarez being guys who are your number 5 starters and you have to count on them, where Povich has made 15 big league starts and Suarez has 1 good year, you instead have a guy in the 5 spot who has 18 seasons of major leagues and a good track record, and Povich and Suarez become your depth. And you feel a lot better about that. And even better on the flip side, say it's not Kramer who's dealt. Say they want Cade Povich in a deal for Framber Valdez. Say the Astros really, really want Cade Povich. If you would have thrown in Povich in the old deal, your number 5 starter without Charlie Morton would have been Albert Suarez. I love Albert Suarez. There's no guaranteeing he will do anything like he did last year, again this year at age 35 with 1 good big league season. That's a lot of questions for your number 5 starter. Now that you have Morton, say you trade Povich for Valdez, Povich and a hitting prospect for Valdez. Valdez number 1, Eflin number 2, Rodriguez number 3, Sugano number 4, Morton right in there at number 5, and then Suarez becomes that nice swingman depth you feel a lot better about instead of counting on him to be a starter all season, which even though he was great last year, he didn't even start all year. He got moved to the bullpen some. He had some struggles. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Albert Suarez. That is why I think this is the fill-in depth move. And it's all about sequencing, right? If they would have made the Cease trade first and then gotten Morton, you would have been like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. They traded away their 5 starter in Dean Kramer. Now they added one in Morton. When you do it before a trade, it's like, are they just adding another back of the rotation guy? Maybe, but maybe not. And that is where this comes back into. It's all about how you look at it. It's all about what the Orioles do for the rest of the offseason. And that is what is really important to remember. I understand the frustration, but you can't grade an offseason until it's over. If 2 months from now, this is the Orioles rotation, Eflin, Rodriguez, Kramer, Morton, Sugano, there's not going to be some nice things said on this show about what Mike Elias and David Rubenstein did, because they lost Corbin Burnes. They didn't do anything to replace him. And that is not a World Series caliber rotation. But if we get to the end of the offseason, and remember, the Orioles made the Corbin Burnes trade on February 1st of last year. We're at January 3rd right now. They still got plenty of time to make this deal. If the O's trade for Framber Valdez and they have to deal away Dean Kramer to do it, and Charlie Morton's here to fill in, and we get to opening day, and it's Valdez, Eflin, Rodriguez, Morton, Sugano, that feels a lot closer to a World Series ready rotation with a legitimate number one, like a Dylan Cease, like a Framber Valdez, like hopefully a Pablo Lopez at the top of that rotation. And that is why it is all about the sequencing. And I get it. It's hard to be patient, but just waiting for that final shoe to drop. And again, if they don't make that big move, this Charlie Morton signing in a vacuum raises the floor of their rotation, makes them incrementally better. I'm all down for that. It's a low risk 1-year deal for a proven veteran. But at the end of the day, it's not enough to make this a World Series caliber team. That is why I'm willing to, again, reserve the judgment of this move now, because the winds seem to blow towards this is a move to set them up to make a bigger move. That is the hope. And I guess we're just at the point where we shall see. But to finish things off here, I did want to kind of talk about the Orioles spending this offseason, because it has been disappointing. They haven't made the big splash, but this is now the fourth big leaguer that they have signed. The Orioles have now spent $86 million this offseason. That is the sixth most money spent by any team in Major League Baseball. And we are in January. We're about halfway through the offseason. Most of the big names are off the board, and the Orioles are sixth in spending. It's been a long time since the Orioles have been sixth in spending. Now, I get it. 3 of the 4 are 1-year deals. They've gone after more guys that raise the floor instead of raise the ceiling of the team. I understand all of that. Perfectly valid points. But at the very least, this is not the John Angelos era. At the very least, they are upping the payroll under David Rubenstein. They are up to a Fangraphs projected $148 million for their 2025 opening day payroll. Now, that's nothing compared to what the Mets and the Yankees and the Dodgers are sending out there. I get it. But the Orioles were in the bottom 3 of baseball even when they were winning games the last couple of years. $148 million, that puts you closer to middle of the pack. I believe it would still be in the bottom half, but that puts you in the 15 to 20 range rather than being 28th or 29th, which is what they have been lately. So yeah, it's baby steps, but it's at least nice to know that the Orioles have the payroll room and are willing to give out these deals to up the payroll and improve the team incrementally. Again, it is not the big splashy move. We're still waiting on that. That is the one they need. They still need a top of the rotation starter to be a serious World Series contender and complete this offseason. But this move makes the team better, and it also, as I mentioned, may set them up to make that move in the future. Now, the 40-man roster was full before the Orioles announced this signing, so they did have to DFA Rene Pinto. We salute Rene Pinto for his time as an Oriole. He was claimed off waivers by the Orioles from the Rays 2 months ago. He is a backup catcher who's had some solid batted ball data and has been kind of an up and down defender. The thing with Rene Pinto is the Orioles then signed Gary Sanchez to a 1-year deal to be their backup catcher. So Pinto kind of doesn't make sense. And you could say, oh, Pinto could be the number 3 catcher. Well, to be a number 3 catcher, you need minor league options. You can freely be sent up and down between the big leagues and AAA. Pinto is out of options, so he didn't make a lot of sense on the roster anymore when Sanchez was signed. So Rene Pinto is gone to clear space on the 40-man, which is full again for Charlie Morton. That opens it up for Blake Hunt, the catcher who was acquired in the Mike Baumann deal with the Mariners last year. He is on the 40-man roster. He has options, and he most likely goes into the season as the number 3 catcher for the Orioles. That not really here nor there, comparing it to signing Charlie Morton, who actually helps this team. But thank you all for tuning in for this one. Again, I know it's not the sexiest, most exciting move, but it raises the floor, and then you just got to wait. You got to be willing to wait it out. Again, the Burns trade was February 1st. We still got plenty of time for that to happen. If you're looking for a large episode of tearing down the Orioles and the moves they made this offseason, if no more moves are made, that's going to come in March. But you got to give a team time to work out these deals. Again, trades and signings, they are a two-way street. The other team, the other player, they've got to agree to those things. And sometimes it can take a while for that to happen. I am confident the Orioles are in trade talks with these other teams. My confidence is 60-40 in favor of actually getting one of those top pitchers in trade. But we will certainly see. And for now, Charlie Morton makes the O's a little bit better and gets them another veteran and hopefully sets them up to make that bigger deal in the next month or so. That'll do it, though, for this live episode on a Friday evening. Again, thank you so much for everyone who tuned in here on YouTube, everyone who's having a good conversation in the comments. I know some people are kind of worked up about this deal, but was trying to follow along as I'm reading my notes, as I'm trying to do the podcast, and enjoying the conversation in the comments section as well. Got a lot of Orioles fans who obviously want the best for this team, want to see this team make some big moves, and hopefully this is a stepping stone move to the Orioles getting a lot better later this offseason. I will be back on Monday. Who knows if the Orioles will make another move between now and then. They seem to come in bunches. Remember, the Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez signings came like hours apart, so maybe something else is coming for the Orioles. But if not, got a couple things on tap next week. 3 more episodes coming up when we return. Wanted to talk about kind of the Gregory Soto versus Cionel Perez of it all in the bullpen. Like, who will be the Orioles' number 1 bullpen lefty with Danny Coulombe gone? And then I also wanted to talk next week about extensions. The Orioles have not given an extension to anyone. We're kind of waiting for them to, hey, if you're not going to sign big free agents from outside your organization, extend someone who's already in your organization. The Orioles are one of 2 teams who do not have a current player on their roster that's been extended. Only the Orioles and the Athletics don't have a player on the roster who has been extended by the team yet. That is kind of a sad group to be in. I wanted to break that down a little bit further on an episode coming up next week. And again, the pod will be back on Monday. But until then, thank you all so much for tuning in for the live show. I am Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.